But those websites are quite useful. I've included some examples here. You see an example that I took during the spring from the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. You'll see here that they provide an impact of Energy Policy Act of 2005, so they're providing some background information. They have the response letters from oil companies with regard to this legislation, so they reach out to various lobbying groups and ask for their views. They do a lot of webcasting by this committee, and so you can get the webcast schedule. And as I mentioned, minority and majority views. Here's the news from the Democratic side of this committee. That is, in this case, they were in the minority. But they have equal billing on the website and can make sure that their views are presented. Let me move on to plenary and floor activities. In both the European Parliament and the U.S. Congress, I found that they have high standards for accuracy and timeliness. Most of them, in both cases, information is presented on the same day or at the latest on the next day. There is a live broadcast in the case of the live webcast in the case of the Congress and the Parliament. And in the United States, its proceedings are broadcast on broadcast television. Completeness is good. The documentation for both, I found, is complete for all the actions taken. The statements are complete, the votes taken. There is some problem with clarity and context. There's very little explanation of the meaning of those votes. The vote will simply say, agreed to so-and-so's amendment. There's relatively little explanation as to what that amendment said or what it did, and the user is forced to go find that information. There's no publicly searchable votes database, so people cannot find how members have voted over time. And in the states in particular, many people in the public sector have taken over the task of providing this information because the Congress itself is not providing it. We've talked so far about tracking systems, about committee systems, and about plenary systems. I want to summarize briefly what I found with regard to how well we're doing in terms of explaining content and providing context. You've already heard some of this. In the European Parliament, there are explanatory sections that accompany draft proposals. I found those brief but useful. They're brief in part because of the translation requirements, so they're limited in number of pages. Committee reports are good, but again, in the European Parliament, they're brief. I've mentioned the summaries by the LUE staff, which are outstanding. I want to mention the Parliament's press service reports because I found those, to me, surprisingly helpful. I say surprisingly because I'm somewhat of a skeptic about press services, and particularly ones in Parliament. The press service in the European Parliament seems to have achieved two goals, which I found quite interesting. One is that they are quite objective. I read dozens and dozens of press reports looking for bias and could not find it. But in reading those documents, I found lots of explanation and context and then links to other information. So in this case, a press service was providing a very good service, in my opinion. I realize that this is an expensive operation. Many parliaments cannot afford to sustain this kind of operation, but certainly in the European Parliament it seemed to be working. So both LUE and the press service are good integrating sources. I would note also that in my visit to the House of Commons, that the House of Commons library have staff who also prepare explanations of the legislation, and I found those as well to be quite excellent. And in the report, there's a link to that. In the United States, I think we have a lot of good sources. As I've mentioned, the committee reports, we have our budget office analysis, we have summaries by the Congressional Research Service, but we don't have a single integrating source that I found in the European Parliament. And as I've suggested, I think we have a ways to go in the States. Next topic, I've mentioned before under completeness the problem of integrating a lot of different information sources. As we all know, there's been a great growth in legislative information sources in the past several years, internal and external. As I've been pointing out in my research, much of this is not integrated, especially at the committee and plenary level and information from the outside. As I showed you with the Thomas system, I think in the States we were doing something of a good job, but the bar has been raised. And the users are often uninformed of important related sources. And I think the standard should be that a user finding information about a policy activity of the Parliament, wherever he or she finds it, should be able to be connected to all the other relevant information sources in some fashion. That's a huge technical task. It's a complicated design task, but I think that should be the standard for ourselves. I think that technical solutions can be used to generate automatic links where possible, but that often takes a long time to develop. In the United States, we often used staff to create those links manually because they could do the evaluation, they could determine what were the most important links, and they could get them done quickly. So as we automated certain processes, other staff who used to do those things were able to turn their attention to this kind of system integration. I found that a major challenge in achieving a good legislative system is the challenge of achieving or having a vision for that system, goals for the system, and a management process for making sure those goals are carried out. Everything I've been describing to you today that was a good activity or a good or a best practice came about because there was a vision and a process in place to ensure that it was achieved. Establishing vision and goals for a legislative information system is an absolute requirement and an extraordinarily difficult one in a parliamentary or legislative body. There are so many important players in a legislative entity that everybody wants their goals to be the top. And you have independent kingdoms controlling the design of the web page, often the case. The real task is to have a specific vision. I think the European Parliament in the last year set some priorities and a vision. It made a specific statement that it wanted the website to serve the needs of the citizens of Europe and designed a lot of the features around that specific goal. That doesn't mean that everybody agreed on the priorities, but there was a vision and then a mechanism established for ensuring that that mission was carried out, that there was a process in place that was quite formalized, and that group set the priorities and the standards and reported to the President of the Parliament for accountability. In the United States, for our internal system, we've had something of that success. We are required to provide a strategic plan and an annual update to that plan, reporting to the Congress on what has been accomplished and what we intend to accomplish in the coming year. And that has been extremely important to continuing to improve that service. When I visited the Netherlands, I found a similar good practice going on. They are rebuilding, they're in the process of rebuilding their legislative system for the members and the public, but they had created a management group of all the critical stakeholders. They had a single chair to coordinate those activities, but all of the key stakeholders realized that they all had to work together